So this is another in, do you know where your data came from and do you know who provided your data? So we're really going to talk about data quality at ingestion, right? So a lot of people talk about data quality as in, does this data meet the right inputs? Does this data meet the basic rules of schema? That's all great, and that's because you have internal problems, right? Or you have problems at the edge with an import. This talk is real. We're really going to talk here about when I bring something in, how trustworthy is the data that I brought in? And so for the rest of this talk, I haven't really run through this yet, but we'll see. I think the real question's at the top, right? So the driver is, what is our data quality at ingestion, and how do we trust that data? And so I think the three main questions in this area are, who provided the data? Like who provided this? Who, like if this was a website, who actually entered the data? And if it was a feed from somewhere else, who was that company or that entity? And then who was the provided data about? So if I am doing a loan and I provide data and I know something, and first of all, you don't know who I am if it's a teaser quote, and we'll go through this in a minute. And you don't necessarily know if the data I entered is actually by me or about me. I could be looking to see if my kid could get a loan. I could be looking to see if my ex has a credit score now, right? And then how accurate is the data provided? So who provided the data? Who is the actor? Who is the data provided about? Who's the target of this? And how accurate is the data that was provided? Because I might really know who provided the data because I might have logged in. But we don't know if I'm just playing around to see with what would change my loan rate, right? It's me, but I'm changing the terms. I changed my income because this is early and you didn't run a credit check on me yet. And so those are the big things we're going to talk about. The data quality at ingestion and how trustworthy is the data that's been provided. And we're going to put everything within the frame of the three questions. We are going to do a school loan example, and we'll talk about who provided, do we know who provided the data? Do we know who it was provided out, and how accurate is the data? So in this case, we have a person at the top, and I'm going to claim this as a two-step process, right? So person comes to a quote aggregator, one of those loan sites, and you're like, man, I need a school loan. And you type in the data, and you get a price, and the quote goes to an email. I would actually argue at this point, actually, you know what? Let's put a table on this, and we'll, see what we can fill in on it. Okay, so we put a table on there, and obviously there was a break there you didn't know. So if we take the questions, who provided the data, who's the data about, and then we go like, what would our expected accuracy? And the goal of this really is to try and figure out, like, do we mark data with expected quality? Do we flag it somehow? Do we like quarantine it, right? It really comes down, a lot of times when we get data, because somebody gave it, we just assume it's the same quality as other data in our system, and we're just trying to tease out the notion that we might have quality tranches, right? So, quality tranche, that's what we're going to do. Oh, where should I put that? I don't even know how to spell tranche. Anyway, okay, so if we look at the top, right, we go to a loan aggregator and we fill in some information, and let's assume that that person doesn't want us to contact them yet. They're just trying to get an idea. So if we look at the loan aggregator, the who provided it, we really have no idea at this point. Now, we might be able to get some device information, but maybe not. And then we know that the quote's about someone. We don't actually know who it is, right? I could be entering this for my kid. I could be entering it for anybody. This is quasi-anonymous. And so the expected accuracy at this point is low, right? I went to the aggregator and I submitted some data, and then we sent a quote to an email address. So does that change anything? So now if we look at that, we say when we sent the quote to an email, we think somebody associated with that email provided the quote, the information to get my school loan. We don't really know who that data is about yet because they may or may not have entered the right data. The email address could be a burner email address. And so our expected accuracy at this point, where I got a link quote from somebody, right? So I went to the aggregator, sent the data off to others. The quote came back in an email. And so the only thing we know for sure at this point is that the quote, well, we think the quote's associated with this email. I happen to use president@whitehouse.gov. If I'm not interested, I can't imagine the spam they get, and it's not just from me. So I know it's an email address, but that doesn't tell me anything at that point, and it doesn't tell me that that address has anybody home to even receive the message. Somebody at that address, probably me, clicks on the quote email. So what does that tell us? It actually, wow, expected accuracy. Actually, I guess I should have said trust in the who provided and trust in the who about. Man, you know what? We'll go with this anyway. Okay. So if I click back on the email, I'm going to say that we know there are a couple possibilities here. And those possibilities are that I might, as a loan company, already have somebody tied to that address, right? So that might be good. That might mean I know it's actor at email address, and so that either could be an actor that I know, or it could be a burner email address or something. I don't have contact issue. So we may or may not have learned something by the email address other than, well, we might also have marketing tied to that email address or a campaign. And so that click back from the email tells us that we round trips to some endpoint. If we've got it in somewhere else in our system, we know it's one or more people that have access to that email address. The same thing works for SMS, right? If you do SMS click back, it's basically the same. So in this case, we have some accurate email, which may or may not know who that is at this point, because we might have done prior business with them. And we know the quote is about somebody, but we don't know if it's about that person. And the expected accuracy is low. Now, if they've done a quote before for a school loan, because they're really thinking of going to school, and they used the same email address before, we possibly could compare the who, the about, like who the loan application was for. We possibly could compare those and see if they're the same person and see if the same data has been submitted. So if we did the round trip with other data, then we might be able to raise the confidence. You know what? I'm going to put that on the page here. If we check if we've seen this person before, we can possibly escalate their credentials, right? We could possibly escalate our trust in the accuracy or who this is about. Well, maybe not. They could have done a bunch of bogus quotes and school loan applications, and these could be fraudsters. So at this point, we don't really know much. So now they go in and edit the quote and get another price. So what happens? So it's pretty grim here still, right? They edited the quote. This actually didn't change anything. All we know is we think they may have tightened down the accuracy at this point. So maybe it went from low to low plus plus. Like it's just a little bit higher than low. But basically at this point, it is untrusted, right? Now they go and submit the application. We start to process the paperwork for that. At this point, we have a decision to make. Do we try and compare this person to public data? Oh, how do I put that in here? Let me write something in. I put this at the bottom because we could compare to public data. Let's say we don't compare to public data, and then we'll come back and we'll realize the marker board is out of space, right? When I submit the application at this point, I really still don't, we think because I compare to public data that I now know who the person is and that I know who, well, at this point, I know who the loan's about, right? I know who it is. And I don't know if the data is accurate or not until I compare to public data. So let's just say they submit and our trust in the data at this point, maybe we're optimistic. At this point, I'm going to claim that I have some idea who the actor is, like who's providing the data. I still think it's someone. I don't actually know if the person providing it is the same person the loan's about. Okay, because maybe I haven't done any compare with public data or one of those things where they ask you your last car payment and all that. And so at this point, without doing anything, we end up with basically a moderately anonymous application that we could bind back to an email address or like a phone number. If we compare the data to some public data, secrets about that person, that would give us, well, we got two sets of secrets to work with here. We have the secrets that we would do when we submit, and in theory, that would tell us that the actor and who this is about is the same person, but it really doesn't, right? Like, I can do my kids' loan, I'm going to know all their secrets. So in this case, who submitted the loan and who the loan's about could still be two different people. There's not necessarily, we know who that is. We'll mark this. And if we compare to public data, we might increase our trust in the fact that we know who someone is or who the actor is. And the question is the data accurate? So that we really don't know how accurate it is unless we compare it against some other source. Now, if we compare it against some other source, we still have to look at it and say, is the public data source wrong or the bought data wrong to compare this against, like a credit report back. And so the goal there is we think that we can increase the accuracy, right? So we think the expected accuracy would be high. In this case, you know what? I'm just going to rewrite that. So I'm not sure what to call it here, right? In this case, if we validate against the public data, we know that the actor, who we think the actor is, because they gave us enough information to tell us who they were, and we assume that that is the same person that's doing the application, because very few school applications have a way to say, hey, are you the person actually requesting this loan, or are you doing it on somebody else's behalf? So if we don't support on behalf of there, then in theory the actor and someone, by the time we submit it and we validate it to the public, we think those are the same people in this case, right? And we think we have high trust on the data, but not in this case. If they weren't a previous customer, then it's only because we validated it to the public. So in that case, we think we know who provided the data. We think we know who it was provided about because it was the same person. And we think the data is accurate because otherwise we're gonna do some risk mitigation by validating against public information, right? Now, this could have gone differently. Let's look at it from the point of view where they click on the quote email, and let's say that they are already a customer. So let's erase this. So now we're going to say that the email address is an existing customer's email or somebody that we've done business with before, right? So this will probably change some of this, right? What we'll know here is when they click on the quote email, we're actually going to drive them to their account. So we will know who provided the data will be a previous customer. So let me put that up. So they're a previous customer. That means we know who the applicant is. I'm sorry, the person filling out the application. It may still be on behalf of somebody else. And so we don't really know who it's about still, and we don't know the expected accuracy. So let me put that up there. At this point, we know that we know who the person is who's filling out the application. We think we know who this, well, no. At this point, we only know that it's about someone and that it's, low to medium accuracy at this point. It's still low because they might not have realized we were going to drive them into their account again, into their previously existing loan portfolio. And so what happens here? They edit the quote, and at this point, we're probably going to validate them against themselves. So if we validated them against themselves, then we would know who their previous customer, because they rolled back into a previous login. And people may not do this, right, because they used a burner email or something else. So in this case, we know it's the previous customer, previous loan customer, right? And if we're going to only let them apply for their own loans, then we're going to validate this against their current previous data and any public data. And we know that at this point, the expected accuracy is probably pretty high, although it's not a given because they haven't decided to buy the loan yet, right? So it could flip back and forth here between high and low, or low and medium or something, right? We don't know the accuracy of the data at all because their circumstances could have changed and they haven't decided to buy it yet. And so we're probably not going to pay to buy data to match it up against more recent data. And so in this case, we know who the person who provided, and if we drive them to only getting loans about themselves, we know it's the same person, the previous customer. If we don't do that, then we still don't know who this is, and then we have to figure out how we're going to validate that. So at this point, if they had a previous loan with us and they log back in, and a lot of people do this, you do teaser quotes and you don't really log in until you get quote close to buying the loan, right? We did this with car loans, you do car loan shopping, that kind of stuff. So in that case here, when we submit the application, we're going to validate against the self and validate against public data. So we end up thinking that the person who's doing the application and the person who the application is about are the same person, and we trust the data, right? So what do we get out of this? What we get is on these two paths. So I drew two sets of curves and they're both a little weird, but the idea is that depending on the path we choose, we can start at the top. Let's start at the bottom. Identity. We have the identity of the submitter and the identity of the person that we're going to qualify for the loan. And those two identities have trust curves. So that's the identity trust curve on the bottom. How well do we think we know the two identities? Who provided the data and who was the data provided by about? And those two can be different, right? And so we might have a long curve for, we know, like if I log back in, my who provided the data trust goes way up earlier. Or if they drag it out, then who provided the data may not be till we validate against public data, right? So the curve would be different. And the curve for who the data was provided about for this school loan also varies on the approach we take, and we're ignoring fraud for the moment. And then the accuracy of the data also has curves. If we think we can get public or credit or other data for the school loan and validate it, we get to a point where we're ready to validate it, to pay to validate it, right? That might be late in the game where we do that because we want to make sure they're serious. And so we're going to give them like teaser loan rates or like payments, right? And the other possibility is that person exists in our system already. And if it looks like the data they entered for this, or we filled in, matches our data, then we might believe that data is accurate earlier. So based on the approach we take, we have identity confidence and data confidence. The identity of the person requesting the action, the identity of the person that they're entering the data about. Hopefully they're the same one, although we have use cases where that's not true. Broker would be an example. We could have a loan broker that's shopping for somebody, and those two people would be different then, right? But in this case, we used an example where it's not a loan broker, it's the same person. So we have identity confidences, and then we have data confidence. And those, I just put a bunch of dots on there, right? Because the identity, in theory, the identity confidence and the data confidence want to be in the upper right corner. High identity confidence, high confidence in the data. And they kind of go together, but they may not be linear together. And so the deal is, when we bring data in, what is the threshold for something being considered real data about that person? And what threshold is the data considered to be a journey for people in the system, where we can learn by the journey of that and kind of rate things based on our confidence, and what part is just sort of trash data we're going to ignore. So anything in the bottom corner is basically not trash data, but we want to collect it because we need to understand behavior. But it may not really be meaningful to the process until it passes some zone in the middle of this. So what was the whole point of this, right, was how do we know whether we trust our data that comes in? When do we trust it to be what we expect so we could give this school loan? And do we need to tag this data with the identity confidence and the data confidence? If we tag it with the data with confidence levels, at this point, I feel like we need more than one, right? We need the data confidence, how accurate do we think it was, and then how accurately do we think we know who did that. Now, a lot of places will just suck it in, but with this school loan thing here we're talking about, this is an option. And so the whole point here was we need to pay attention to the data quality as we ingest it and then use it correctly for those different trust levels or competences. That's all I got. Have a great day.